What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new film Madam Web, which begs the question, is it more fun to watch Madam Web or hit yourself in the face with a hammer? And I'm leaning toward the hammer, but I don't know. I don't know if I should try to be objective or just philosophical about all the horrible things that this movie represents, but I will push back on people saying that it's the worst movie ever made. It's nowhere close to the worst movie ever made. That honor probably belongs to The Exorcist Believer, which came out only a few short months ago. But Madam Web is pretty terrible. I would say it's a franchise killer. It's a genre killer. It's a studio killer. It's a career killer. I mean, the director, S.J. Clarkson, she'd previously worked on the show Succession, which is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. But I think she would have to make like a, I don't know, like a Roman emperor orgy saga starring James Hancock before I'd be willing to watch one of her movies again. It was just unendurable, but maybe the blame belongs to the screenwriters who were also responsible for the movie Morbius. And Morbius was pretty terrible, but it was like inoffensively terrible. It's just kind of bland and stupid and inept and incompetent with one of the worst tacked on post-credit scenes that I've ever seen. But Madam Web is one of those movies that's so bad where you have to just pause and stop for a second and say, all right, what are we doing here? Let's start with Sony and their live-action Spider-Verse, a Spider-Verse that does not have Spider-Man, which always seemed a little strange to me. Like, why do you have all these characters with variations on Spider-Man's costume if they never interact with or fight or team up with Spider-Man? That's the least of this movie's problems. But if you look at Venom, Let There Be Carnage, Morbius, now this, and we got Kraven the Hunter coming and Venom 3 later this year, it's almost like Sony did not get the memo that everybody's scaling back on superheroes, because this year Disney's releasing one superhero movie, Deadpool 3. I think the trailer looks a little mediocre, but at a minimum it's probably a box office slam dunk. And Warner Brothers, they're releasing no superhero movies. They're basically just kind of trying to calm everything down and clearing the deck so that James Gunn has the best possible chance of releasing his new Superman movie next year, without any distractions and that sort of thing. But yeah, the superhero genre has been failing and failing hard as of late. And every once in a while, a cool one comes along. I mean, I live, breathe, and die superheroes. I'm the first to admit when a good one comes along. But the great majority of the shows and movies in the superhero genre now, if you were prone to believing in conspiracies, you could almost talk me into believing that somebody's deliberately trying to kill the superhero genre. Like if you were to go back to the early 2000s, find some executive, like, I hate superheroes, this must end. Like, how do we put a stop to this? And someone in a very devious way says, why don't we greenlight a bunch of terrible movies that will kill the genre for all time? But it could very well kill a few careers along the way as well when you get movies like fucking Madam Web. And we hear so much pissing and moaning these days about the so-called anti-fans. I'm like, it's not like the anti-fans are sitting around talking about why they don't like The Godfather or Casablanca or, Taxi Driver. They're talking shit about terrible movies. So either you have to accept the idea that all movies are created equal, and so it's not nice to make fun of bad movies, which I obviously don't buy into that point of view, or you can accept the fact that when people love movies, and I love movies dearly, when you love them, it's like they are like, they become part of your DNA, and they represent like who you are and how you interact with people, and they bring meaning to your life. And when a movie's terrible, it's just a soul-sucking, awful, kind of sinking experience. And what was even worse about watching this movie today with like 4 or 5 people in the crowd, one person was chuckling like they sit around all day in the bathtub, biting their own fart bubbles as they rise to the surface. I was like, all right, I'm glad you're having a good time. But I saw this in what's called, Screen X or Screen Z? What the fuck was it called? Screen X, which was the lamest gimmick that I've ever seen. I've been to 4DX, which is awful as well. But Screen X, what they basically do, you have your normal movie, and they take like the last millimeter on the side and they stretch it all the way along the side. So for big action scenes or jungle scenes or whatever, suddenly you get like this weird distorted feeling that like the whole movie's wrapped around you. But because they're taking just a small part of the screen and stretching it, any movement of any kind on the edges creates all these crazy distractions on the side. It's not like they're adding additional information. They're just adding additional, I guess in their mind, they're thinking they're adding additional visual stimulation. But what they're doing is just pulling your eyes away from the movie that you have paid to see. So that'll be my last Screen X experiment. Unless a filmmaker comes along and says, you know what, I'm going to make the ultimate Screen X movie where I'm going to use the entire screen, then bring it on. But this is just another bullshit gimmick trying to squeeze more money out of moviegoers. But I guess if there's one positive out of this experience that I just endured, it was getting to experience Dakota Johnson talking all kinds of shit over the last couple of weeks about the state of the movie industry. And Dakota Johnson, every once in a while, she'll do something like a bigger splash, like a full-blown art house film for adults with pretty glorious nudity and that sort of thing, but great characters, incredible dialogue. Like, she knows how to identify a good script. And she also knows how to fire her management or her agent after they sign her up for a movie like Madam Web. And to be fair, she probably had to read the script and say yes. It's not like they put a gun to her head and made her do this. But at least she's recognizing, you know what, I just need to try to save face until the movie's out, and then I can try and reinvent myself. But I also get a little frustrated sometimes when you hear actors talking about the lack of courage or the lack of vision with certain studios and certain filmmakers. I'm like, well, Dakota, I'm sure you made vast sums of money off the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy. Produce your own goddamn movies. Like, there's a simple answer. I don't really like it when people complain about problems without actually trying to do something to play a role in solving those problems. Like, I dabble in the world of independent filmmaking, whether that's with short animated movies or the occasional documentary, but it's like my own little way of kind of trying to contribute to the culture apart from just constantly complaining. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, check out my IMDb profile. You'll see what I've been working on. But it feels like there's too many filmmakers now, and in some cases, too many fans who don't know the difference between a good superhero movie and a bad superhero movie. Like, look at Sony. 20 years ago, they were doing the Sam Raimi trilogy. I mean, Spider-Man 2 was just an absolute fucking, earth-shattering, kick-ass pop culture experience. How is our culture, how is that studio, how is filmmaking taken so many steps backwards in the last 20 years? But I've been complaining quite a bit at this point without saying anything specific, so let's slow it down and talk about what this movie is and who's in it. So first of all, who is Madam Web? I first encountered Madam Web way back in May of 1981. I was just shy of my 5th birthday, but already an avid Marvel Comics reader, because my dad started reading Marvel Comics in the early 60s, and by the early 80s, he was ready to pass on his love and affection to his 2 young boys. So my older brother kind of led the charge, but I was happy to kind of read all the comics that he discarded in his wake. And when I look back at this old issue, which I looked up today, who wrote it and who drew it, when I see that it was written by Dennis O'Neil and drawn by John Romita Jr., I'm just like, oh my God, like, don't make me salivate and drool. Just the idea of writers and artists of that caliber being associated with the superhero genre, that's why we liked superheroes to begin with. We didn't just like superheroes because they were superheroes. We liked superheroes because they were great writers and great artists, bringing them to life. And our biggest dream throughout the 80s and 90s was that one day we'd see some live-action movies that get them right. And they've taken some liberties with the character of Madam Web. It's more or less an origin story for Madam Web, which kind of leads up to her not necessarily being like a crippled old lady in a chair, but, we're kind of getting there. And I guess I should warn you, there'll be some mild spoilers, or fuck it. There'll be some major spoilers in this video because I don't feel like censoring myself in any way, shape, or form. I'm going to say everything I want to say about this movie. And if the order isn't necessarily ideal, it's because the emotion is making me say things as they come to me. But here are all the vital stats ripped from Wikipedia because I want to make sure that everybody affiliated with this movie, we know precisely who is writing, who is directing, who is greenlighting, who is producing, who is responsible for this abomination of pop culture nonsense and vomit. So, Madam Web is a 2024 American superhero film based on Marvel Comics featuring the character of the same name, produced by Columbia Pictures and De Bonaventura Pictures in association with Marvel Entertainment and TSG Entertainment, and distributed by Sony Pictures Releasing. It is the 4th film in Sony's Spider-Man universe, SSU. The film was directed by S.J. Clarkson from a screenplay she co-wrote with Claire Parker and the writing team of Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless, more like Witless or fucking talentless. It stars Dakota Johnson in the title role alongside Sydney Sweeney, Celeste O'Connor, Isabella Merced, Tahar Rahim, Mike Epps, Emma Roberts, and Adam Scott. In the film, Cassie Webb Johnson confronts her past while trying to save 3 young women and their futures from Ezekiel Sims. And I don't know if it'll be possible to call attention to all the movie's flaws or all the most idiotic scenes, but let's just start with Ezekiel Sims. First and foremost, why are you dressed up like an evil Spider-Man when in this world, Spider-Man has yet to be born? A big subplot of the movie is that Spider-Man's mom is expecting him, which leads to, God, there's so many dumb things I want to say. I'm interrupting myself. All right, so let's pause on Ezekiel. But the dumbest part of this movie is when Madam Web, she makes this offhand comment about how Uncle Ben thinks that being an uncle means like all the fun of child raising, but none of the responsibility. And she's like, That's what he thinks. I'm like, if you know that Peter Parker's parents are going to die and that he'll have to be adopted by his uncle, you just spent the entire movie stopping horrible outcomes. Like, why not save Peter Parker from this hell of growing up without his parents? It's like just little stupid throwaway lines, like where you can tell no one's thinking about like the consequences of certain scenes or certain actions. Or going back to Ezekiel, why are you wearing that stupid costume with the Spider-Man eyes? Like, if all your kind of inspiration for your persona comes from spiders in the Amazon, like maybe dress like an actual like spider, have a scary face or something like that. It's so stupid. It's like Sony wants everybody to constantly be thinking about Spider-Man without actually putting Spider-Man in these movies. So it's like at a certain point, Sony and Disney just to figure out what the fuck they're doing with the character and just let it all be the same shitty shared universe. Or, I don't know, maybe stop making Spider-Verse movies entirely. This is one of those movies where you're like, maybe Hollywood should just take a break. Take 5 years off. No more movies and let the next generation come along and fire everybody and start from scratch and let them make their own mistakes because it can't be any worse than this kind of crap. And obviously, it's easy to get pessimistic when you see a shitty movie. And we've got Dune Part 2 right around the corner. We've got Ethan Coen's Drive Away Dolls. There are things to look forward to. But as somebody who grew up worshiping superheroes, it's just a soul-killing experience, having to endure movies like Madam Web. And we've all been guilty of watching terrible movies where, for whatever reason, it just speaks to us and we can't help but enjoy it. Like if you enjoyed canon movies from the 1980s, a lot of like breakdancing movies and ninja movies and crazy science fiction and horror, but as a little kid, I wasn't aware that those canon movies were kind of schlocky. I loved them all the same. It didn't matter. Like there was so much... Whether it was intentional or not, there was so much entertainment value and comedy and nudity and action, like all those canon movies. If you want to know what I'm talking about, watch the documentary Electric Boogaloo. It's one of the best documentaries about film history you'll ever see. But it shows how you can make dozens, if not hundreds, of really crummy, schlocky genre films, but a few cool gems will slip through the process that will remain beloved for decades to come. The Sony Spider-Verse movies, they feel like canon movies, but without any of the charm or the memorable characters or memorable movies or memorable ingredients that go into making people fall in love with an individual movie, because everything in Madam Web feels incompetent and sloppy. Check out the poster featuring Sydney Sweeney. I feel like if you were to ask anybody on the planet right now under the age of 30, who is the sexiest young actress under 30 in showbiz? Sydney Sweeney. No brainer. So why would you release a poster like this where she, I don't want to be unkind, but she does not look her best in this particular poster when everybody knows she's capable of looking fantastic. I mean, she is a true goddess walking. Like, watch fucking Euphoria. Like, woo, holy moly. Or if you think that show's too outrageous, watch season 1 of The White Lotus. Sydney Sweeney's fucking awesome, and I think she's got serious chops, and I think her future is bright, as is the future for Dakota Johnson. Much like her character, she seems to have predicted the future and recognized this movie is going to bomb and bomb hard. And so she's already trying to pivot. And I do think Dakota Johnson will survive because, I mean, I love Dakota Johnson. She's fantastic. But Madam Web, I have a feeling that they were basically tricked into thinking, you're going to join the MCU. You're going to be as big as Robert Downey Jr. Oh, by the way, did we mention this is a Sony Spider-Verse movie, not the official MCU? But here's a philosophical question. At this moment in time, who makes worse superhero projects, Disney or Sony? Because Sony does still have the Spider-Verse animated films, which are damn good. I mean, whether you like the animation style of the stories or the pop culture references or whatever the case may be, there's probably something in those 2 movies and a third on the way that you can say, look, all right, this is fantastic stuff. More of this, please. But when you watch a movie like Venom 2, I didn't even like the first Venom, but if you watch the Venom movies or Morbius or this, you're just like, please stop. No mas. Like, I'm going to go play video games. I'm going to go watch MMA. I'm going to go watch porn. I'm going to take a walk. I'll do anything other than like continue to watch this crap. But like Disney's latest crop of superhero abominations. I mean, last year they did have Guardians, but they also had Quantumania. They also had the Marvels, and they had a bunch of crummy TV shows. And everyone's like, oh, those shows are good. No, they're not. Like, learn the difference between good superhero projects and lame superhero projects. Demand more from your studios. Demand more from your entertainment. Even if you love movies to pieces, we do have options. Like, starting last August, I started playing Baldur's Gate 3, or I'd played the early access, but I started playing it in full. And since then, I've invested about 400 hours into the game. And every minute in the world of Baldur's Gate 3, from the dialogue to the characters to the gameplay to the action to the look to the cinematics, every single minute in that game is vastly more entertaining than every single superhero movie released in 2023 put together. And that's no exaggeration. If anything, maybe I'm being too kind and not being mean enough to how bad superhero movies have gotten. But like when you have an option like Baldur's Gate 3 out there with all these fresh faces, all these new characters you can fall in love with, and with 700 hours of cutscenes to discover within where you're exploring all these different story options, you can't let people play Baldur's Gate 3 and then just expect them to choke down Madam Web without some complaints. So does that make me an anti-fan? No, it makes me the exact opposite. It makes me a colossal fan of pop culture, a colossal fan of kick-ass entertainment experiences, and I demand a Baldur's Gate level 3 experience. I recognize most games and movies cannot reach those heights, but we're paying for these fucking experiences, so demand more. Don't accept Loki Season 2 as like the norm. The norm should be Captain America Civil War. The norm should be Kick-Ass. The norm should be Logan or Deadpool. Like that should be the norm, like the best this genre has to offer. But I mentioned before how so many aspects of this film feel half-assed or incompetent or just like it just needed like a second pass or another take or whatever the case might be. And nowhere is that more apparent than with the character played by Celeste O'Connor, a.k.a. Maddie Franklin's future Spider-Woman. There are two different Spider-Women in this, but she is one of the Spider-Women in this. But when we're introduced to her, the ambulance driven by Dakota Johnson is driving down the road, and a skater comes out in front of the ambulance and stops it, flips her the bird, and keeps going. And I remember when the skater came out, I was like, who is that weird, like 6'9", like awkward looking skater with pigtails? And then the camera did the reverse shot, and it's a person who's like a foot and a half shorter and black. And Celeste O'Connor was like, oh, that was just a stunt person who was not a physical match for Celeste O'Connor whatsoever. Who were like, the idea that we were supposed to believe that those two people are the same. It's just comical, man. I sat there in the theater just kind of cracking up inside, like, oh my God, this movie is going to be so much worse than I ever thought it might be. Or then later on, same character, similar problem. There's a big action scene on, I can't remember if it's the Long Island Expressway or just the subway, but there's a train. Everybody's waiting for the train to go, and Ezekiel's about to attack. And Dakota Johnson's trying to figure out, like, who is this Ezekiel guy? How can I save all these girls that he's trying to hunt down and kill, blah, blah, blah. And when Maddie Franklin is running onto the train, she does this thing, because she's a skater, she's always been harassed by cops and that sort of thing. But we see this angle where the doors are open, and there's Maddie's running, and she's got like 6 cops behind her in a line. She comes through the open door and hides. The door doesn't close. The door stays open, and the cops just kind of keep jogging by. I was like, she just took a right in front of you. You were like 6 inches apart. And she's like, ha ha, I pulled a fast one. I'm hiding from you now. You can't see me. It's like, this is like, I mean, even if you were like a child or a toddler, you might be like, wait a second, like how come the cops just didn't follow her in, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's so limp. It becomes the antithesis of entertainment. So I think instead of talking about anti-fans, we need to start talking about anti-movies, where movies completely, utterly fail in everything that movies are supposed to provide. Namely, a cool story with interesting characters that you love, doing really cool things. Like when you go see a superhero movie, it's not that complicated. You want to see badass characters, you want to see a few kick-ass action scenes, you want some interesting lore and connectivity. But we've all seen many, many good superhero movies. I mean, you can go back to basically like X-Men 2 and Spider-Man 2. Like we've had 20 years of superhero movies at a very high level. Or if you want to go back even further, Richard Donner's Superman, or even like the Fleischer Brothers animated series from the early 40s. We all know what a good superhero show or movie looks like. And so if you're going to put something out there which is clearly, fathoms below what is the norm, it makes you wonder, like, does the studio care? Do the filmmakers care? And if the studio doesn't care and if the filmmakers don't care, why should we care? Why should we put down money and pay for these subpar experiences when you can basically do anything else, probably for free, and have a better time? And I always find it so frustrating when I'm reading Deadline or Hollywood Reporter or Variety when people are scratching their heads like, how come more people aren't going to the movies? How come the business keeps shrinking? It's like, yeah, if you sell subpar products, then you will get a subpar response. And this movie only cost $80 million to make. I'm astonished that it cost $80 million. It's got 3 scenes that are pretending to be action scenes that are nothing close to a satisfying action scene, along with some idiotic scenes down in Peru in the jungle with all these people that have like spider powers. It's like a jungle full of people as powerful as Spider-Man, but they got their powers from a different kind of Spider-Man. They're trying so hard to connect their Spider-Verse without actually including the one vital ingredient. Like the reason I used to buy Amazing Spider-Man and Spectacular Spider-Man and Web of Spider-Man and Spider-Man, 4 different comics that were being published at the same time. That's how popular Spider-Man was in the early 90s. And in the summer, it was so popular, it would go in a bi-weekly format. You could get Amazing Spider-Man twice a month. I couldn't get enough Spider-Man in my life. Loved the villains, loved his friends, loved his allies, loved his entire supporting cast. But the hub of the wheel that holds it all together is Spider-Man. Stop making Spider-Verse movies unless Spider-Man is in the fucking movie. And things have gotten so bad for superhero shows and movies, and in some cases superhero games, I wouldn't dream of sharing my love and affection for the glories of the past with somebody who's young today. And I come from a huge family. I'm one of 9 siblings. I've got 10 nieces and nephews. I'm surrounded by a lot of different tastes and preferences, but one of the really fun parts about having a lot of siblings is as I was growing up, was sharing my passion for things like Lord of the Rings or for Marvel Comics or Dungeons and Dragons or Nintendo. Like when you love something and you have a lot of expertise and then you expose somebody to it and they fall in love with it, like, all right, like the culture will continue and they will continue to pass this on. But if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, I've got a 6-year-old son, he wants to get into Spider-Man, like where do I start? I'd say fuck Spider-Man, fuck superheroes, like expose them to Demon Slayer. Get a subscription to Crunchyroll, start them at the beginning, and just let them watch the entire anime. Like, that is a franchise with a future, with future seasons and movies that you can expect to be interesting or to be cool. Or I'd say, pick up Elden Ring. From Software is going to continue to make kick-ass video games moving forward. I've like all the confidence in the world in From Software's ability to deliver great games. I have zero confidence in Sony, Warner Brothers, or Disney's ability to deliver solid superhero entertainment on a regular basis. There will be exceptions. I think James Gunn's Superman movie, keep like stuttering on like, I keep wanting to say his superhero movie instead of his Superman Legacy. I have all the confidence in the world that he'll give us something special. But it just seems like now the norm is let's cut costs by hiring hacks who don't give a fuck about the source material, who will just do as we tell them to. But I guess the last laugh is on the people who spent $80 million on this giant steaming pile of shit, because I think even though the budget is half or a third of what like Disney might spend, I still think Sony's going to lose basically every single dollar that they invested into this, unless it just becomes one of those things where it's like people go to the theater in droves while drunk, just to like throw popcorn and drinks at the screen and laugh at the movie's expense and talk about how fucking idiotic it is, because it's one of those movies that makes you dumber while you're watching it. So let me have a quick glance at my notes to see if there's anything else I haven't gotten to. Oh, the final few seconds of the movie. You would have thought that by the time you get to the end of the movie, all right, let's just tease what's coming next and let's just let everybody go home with a smile on their face. But it's like, nope, we got a few more twists and turns where the movie reaches or hits peak stupidity in the last few seconds, where you get a glimpse of the future to come with Madam Web and her 3 underlings. And it's like a poor man's Birds of Prey. And I'm not talking about that stupid fucking movie. I mean, between Birds of Prey and the Marvels and now Madam Web, if I were like a chick who's into superhero flicks, I'd be like, fuck all of you. Like, I'm not just going to eat whatever schlop you're going to like put in front of me. Like, give me something worth getting excited about. But if you go back to the original Birds of Prey comic way back when, where you had Huntress and Black Canary working side by side for Oracle, that's clearly what they're trying to set up. Where you got Madam Web in her wheelchair with her blindfold on, predicting the future, but it's like she's omniscient and knows all things at all times. So it's like, well, then why do you even need any superheroes at all? Like, she could just kind of tell people what's going to happen. Everybody could just solve their own problems. But the last few seconds, I was like, all right, we have reached peak stupid. Let me go home and share my feelings or share my temper tantrum. And I guess my final conclusion is that the superhero genre is a genre without a future. It's all used up, as Marlena Dietrich's character said in Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. If you want to watch something good, watch Touch of Evil. Like, movie was made almost 70 years ago. But I mean, I could watch Touch of Evil every day for the rest of my life and always be gloriously entertained. So yeah, like Marlena predicts for Hank Quinlan in that movie, your future is all used up. And maybe there'll be little spikes like Deadpool 3 where suddenly people remember, oh, I used to like all these characters that are making cameos and like superheroes. Those used to be a thing. It's time for some new stories, some new franchises, some new entertainment. I mentioned before, Demon Slayer. Watch Demon Slayer, brand new. The manga started in 2016. I think the show started in 2019. But I'm always complaining about how every generation needs to have franchises they can call their own, whatever those sci-fi or fantasy or whatever those franchises might be in any genre. every generation needs their franchises that they can say things were cool when I was young because of this. And I think Demon Slayer is one of those franchises where if you're 15, you'd be like, dude, 2024 fucking rule. We had so much Demon Slayer to enjoy. So forget Marvel, forget Sony, forget all these fucking companies. Watch some Japanese animation, play some video games, and flip the double bird to bullshit like this. Because Dakota Johnson, she already has, which is actually kind of making me a fan of Dakota Johnson for life. So yeah, she will survive the ordeal of Madam Web, but other folks, maybe not so much. And obviously, I think Sydney Sweeney is going to be just fine as well. But I'm rambling at this point. I'm ranting and raving. It's time to wrap this sucker up. Hope you enjoyed my little meltdown. Hope you enjoyed me committing suicide with this hammer. I was looking for a gun, but I don't have any toy guns in my entire apartment. I'm going to need to get some plastic guns just so I can demonstrate my my suicidal impulses after watching terrible movies. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.